Hello, my name is Michaela Mercer, and I am presenting my research um, project on a primary paper. And the title is called An Analysis of Postoperative Behavior and Personality in Organ Recipient Patients. And this is for my professor's class, Dr. Chen. So first, we're going to talk about the key concepts and what we want to overall gain access or gain knowledge on throughout this whole presentation. We want to first show and understand the process of organs transplants and how rigorous it is, and that is not just an everyday thing that somebody goes through. And also, we want to take what we know once we learn what that is and apply it to what an article that shows like actual statistical data in heart transplant, how it actually causes identity disruption, body integrity, and the interconnectedness. So first, we're going to talk about what is an organ transplant. Organ transplantation is basically the surgical removal of a healthy organ from one person and is transplanted into another person whose organ has failed or was injured and is not working anymore and is not doing anything good for their body. So basically, it's often life-saving and gives like a recipient a whole wonderful lease of life because they can actually live a normal life. But it's actually a really major surgery that carries like a lot of potential risks and give you drawbacks. It's such a chance of like the organ actually rejecting. So once you do get the organ, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to actually work. You have to your body have to actually take the organ, allow it to work with the rest of your organ system. Excuse me. That's why, like, when you do find out that you do need an organ transplant, you have to specifically tell, like, you and your loved one has to come together and gather as much information on organ transplant so you can know what you're about to come into. So most of the organs that are actually transplanted are kidney, pancreas, liver, heart, and lungs, and intestines. And sometimes, but rarely, they do a double transplant where they do such as like the kidney and pancreas or like the heart or in the lung. But kidney transplants are the most common of the transplant surgery, and at least the common single organ transplant are intestines. So when you do need an organ, it's not that you just go get somebody's organ that just anybody's organ. You have to look at several characteristics. You have to look into the blood type. The blood type have to match the size of the organ. And with the size of the organ, the reason that plays a big deal, you think everyone has the same size organ, but kids also do go through transplants. So they can't take a 45-year-old heart and put it in their chest because, first of all, their chest cavity is too small for that heart. Or you can't take a 7-year-old's heart and put it inside of a 45-year-old person's body because the heart haven't even matured enough. So your body can't actually regulate with the rest of your organs with that specific organ. So that plays a big account of. You have to match kind of age range, size, and blood type, and make sure that that person doesn't have any other diseases like HIV or hepatitis B, anything like that. Next, you have to also take into account of how long someone has been waiting on the list, because it's actually a waiting list that you have to go through, and like how sick they are, and like the distance between the donor and the recipient. So, because timing is really critical in a transplant. In transplant, doctors often have to drop the organs inside of a plastic bag and put them on ice to preserve them. But lungs and hearts, lungs soon to stop breathing and a heart soon to stop stopping. So the organs will essentially shut down and start to deteriorate. That means that the doctor only have like a set amount of time between like 5 to 10 hours to get the lungs or the heart to the recipient. And if the travel time is too long or it's a delay in the traveling, the possible organ can go bad, and then that's just another organ out the window of what could have saved somebody's life. Right here, I actually have a video just to get you, just to see how a heart beats on outside the body. So you see how the heart is actually beating outside the body. I know many people have not seen that, but that's just something, that's how they have to keep the heart breathing, or actually the heart healthy. So other than putting the actual organ on ice, with the heart, we're going to focus on the heart now. It's an organ care system that is from the Andover company, known as like the Transmedics, and it came up with a system known to circulate the blood through lungs and pump oxygen through lobes and pump oxygen for hearts outside the body. So currently, this machine is not FDA approved, but they're going on the clinical testing, so they know that it would definitely work, and this would save a lot of people's lives because of the traveling time and how time is so critical. Right here, this figure is showing, we're just gonna look at the key. It says the yellow is where the person is waiting, and the red is where the actual transplant that has taken place. It's just basically showing a correlation of the organ transplant needed compared to how many transplants needed. So you see, the waiting list can possibly, this is how most waiting lists for the different regions are for transplant, that is up to 80,000. So think about 80,000 people are waiting, and only 25 of this is that collapse. So more than 60% is still waiting for the transplant. So you know that's how big transplants are, and how hard it is to get a transplant, and it makes it makes it harder for patients and people to get a transplant, so they become sicker. And then by the time they actually get the organ's not vital, weak. Their body is so weak, and their body will possibly reject it. So my primary research paper that I absolutely fell in love with, because I'm a biology pre-dental psychology minor, is the heart transplant identity disruption, bodily integrity, and the interconnectedness by these listed authors. So basically, the writers address the cardiac transplantation introduces presents new questions about how patients incorporate a transplanted heart into their sense of self and how this impacts their actual identity. They also I think they also use different psychological measures just to measure that. So this is the time where you can bring both the actual biomedical science and the social science together to incorporate and know how things work in the body. Okay. So the hypothesis and the question that we're going to address is, does the identity and its disruption tap into a long tradition of philosophical inquiry around self? So basically the question is asking, does your identity and does the identity of yourself, and does it interrupt cause a disruption into a psychological or philosophical impact on yourself, not physically, but all in your mind or who you are with personalities. So the experimental design they use, they conducted a study using a visual methodology where they used visual studies. And they get this from the Ponte's previous research that was done back in 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 1973. They did this to understand that the embodiment as the matter of both mind and body, and the communication as both, and make sure they're effective and verbal. So the visual method is a distinct body. It's a distinct body of sociology research concerned with ways in which people talk and their bodily conduct and their social interaction. So they want to study that and compare how did the organ transplant cause this to happen to be different than how they were before. The research is also conducted in a single setting, and they did with a large academic health center in Canada. It's actually one of the largest cardiac transplant programs in the country. And it also follows, a global organ donation and transplant to guidelines. So it has specific guidelines that it follows. That's what makes it so great in the programs, and so it's more efficient. And participants were offered the opportunity to be either interviewed at home, or in a quiet room in the hospital away from the clinical setting. The choice of location was basically up to the participants, but 17 other participants being interviewed were interviewed in their homes, and 8 were choosing to be interviewed at the hospital. So they basically videographed the interview, and the actual video ranged from 30 to 2.5 hours. So you know that some participants were very straightforward, and other ones like in depth, digging in or deep to figure out to answer their questions to get them like really good results. But they are all audio taped and videotaped to capture the voice. The reason they did it, they wanted to really catch the voice and the body language to compare them both to each other. But all participants spoke openly and freely after doing a little prompting in the quiet room in the hospital. So right here shows a donor survey of what questions they asked in the interview. So in the first phase of the data analysis, they transcripts and videotapes were simultaneously reviewed at a time log noting, like key moments. And key moments are particularly like events that are embodied responses, such as like gestures, or if they turn a certain way, that they cross their leg, they tilt their heads, things like that. So in the final phase of the data analysis, the research team reviewed all transcript and video recordings. And at that stage, members of the research team met as a group to develop broad themes and ground it so they come to a common ground to compare all of them and like textual and audiovisual data. So the themes were discussed and debated by the researchers in order to reach consciences before being collapsed into like a analytic category. So they could actually take the video and the audio and transfer it to actual physical data material. So the questions are listed as they ask them, has having a new heart changed the way you think about your body? And could you give me an example? Has having a heart transplant changed how you feel about yourself as a person? And could you tell me more about that? And some people say you become a different person after you receive a heart transplant. What is your opinion on yourself? And this is an optional question where they say some people say you're different. Oh, it's the same question. That's a mistake, but those are the questions they asked. So with these questions, with the people who lasted from 2 hours, they probably were putting more in detail and giving impromptu on more of what was next of the question. So they give me an example. They gave an example in the interview. We would ask them, well, how did that make you feel? And that's how they prolonged or how they got more information out of the interviewee. So the results came to overall the identity disruption and manifesting as a distress occurs frequently after heart transplant, regardless of how patients perceive their transplant heart or their donor. And the reality of the transplant heart is what is cut from your body and grafted into another in a living organ. It's such as a exchange of spare parts that denies incorporation of transplant heart into like recipients' and bodies, so provoke distress. So to break that down more to make sure everyone understands, they want to see if taking a living organ and placing it into another living organ system and see how they come together. And they found that it does change your psychological, your personality in some type of ways. So based on their rest of their findings, they just said the current approaches to the informed consent process needs to be revisited in order to include information about the potential risk of identity disruption. So this is more like administration issues that they had, but what they found would have been more helpful to them. So there are many similarities between the organ donor and the organ recipient. However, further biological analysis of actual cells before and after organ donation will necessarily determine whether or not these actual similarities are linked or genetically or psychologically. So one theory that seeks to explain the genetic link is like the systematic memory theory. So these interviews can be compared to like literature and journal published regarding to the topic specifically. And I think they did a really good job of that because they had many sources of what they did. So I think that the experiment was done very thoroughly. So further analysis of the systematic memory theory actually then it will be provide like more evidence necessary to come to a overall clinical and biological and psychological conclusion. So I really basically admire the research for administrating simple data for simple observations, where anybody could look at this article and acknowledge and understood what they were saying because they broke it down to you in very detail. And they also provide statistical data also, and I like how they actually took the verbal, the audio tape, and the video graph and converted that into statistical data for you to actually understand as on figures. So, but I do disagree with the research only providing like a small number of participants. So they could have probably increased it up to like 150 people to just get an overall, of a good experiment, have a big pool to understand and see if it's consistent or not. So basically, to further the study, I would definitely add more variables and distinguish behavior notice, and I will also follow up on participants. And I like to ask the parents of the child, if it was a child, to participate in the screening to gain more information in medical history. And these are my background references. And I would like to thank you.